And good afternoon. How is everybody doing today? Welcome to the broadcast. I am so sorry we're starting uh, about a minute late. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Chris Roddenberry coming to you here from Willow Springs, North Carolina. I'd like to thank everybody for logging in today. If you're here, go ahead and type in the chat bar and let me know you're here. Good afternoon. I knew Nelise is here. She's always here. Lauren Mahaffey's here. Hello, Lauren. Good to see you as well. Thanks for coming today. So I put a video in the chat bar. Now, I don't know if you knew this. Actually, I didn't know this. Was before my time. But before TVs were in most houses, if you wanted to get the news back in the 30s and 40s, and even I expect into some of the 50s, if you wanted to get the news, you had to go to the movies, the movie theater. And before the movie, they would play these newsreels. There'd be probably maybe 10 or 15 of them showing you different new things about politics, maybe World War II. And this one was the invention of this crazy new thing called the computer. I'll bet you probably can't remember a time before the computer existed, but it did. And there was a point in our lives where computers were brand new. And the invention of this thinking machine, this piece of metal that could process information and come up with rational and accurate information answers, ushered in the modern era of psychology, cognition. And cognition is the study of thinking, how people process and use information with their mind. And you folks have probably heard of artificial intelligence as well, right? And the question is artificial intelligence going to get so smart that it controls the world? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next lecture. We'll talk about how computers and human beings are different. So what I'm going to do today is to introduce to you this modern area of psychology we call cognitive psychology, and get you into the frame of mind of understanding how this branch of psychologist learns about the human being. Okay? I see we have a couple more people on the broadcast now. If you're here, go ahead and type your name in the chat bar and tell me hello. It's great to see you. By the way, what did you think of that computer? Lauren, Nelisa, were you impressed with that computer? Hi, Jenna. Good to see you. Thanks for coming today. Pretty big computer, wasn't it? Huge computer. Not small at all. The computer was pretty cool. It had so many wires. It was as big as a room. You know that phone that you have right in front of you. I know each and every one of you has your phone right there. That phone is probably 1,000 times more powerful than that computer that took up an entire room, right? All right, so we're going to talk about cognitive psychology today. Now, I would like to argue, let's think about from the cognitive perspective, we call the human being Homo calculus. That is the man who calculates. Now, I just made that up. Please don't go Google that. Don't tell anybody that it's a new kind of human being. But with the advent of psychology, we began to view the human being as a calculation machine. So in a sense, we began to view the human being in a new light. Remember evolution, this idea of genes, this idea of environment was really, really important in the early forms of psychology. And that's what they focused on. But with the advent of the computer, suddenly we became interested in seeing if we could scientifically understand how human beings calculate information, right? Now, the philosophical roots of cognitive psychology go way back. I don't know if you folks have ever heard the concept tabula rasa. Tabula rasa arose in this debate many centuries ago about whether human beings were born with knowledge or whether or not knowledge was given to human beings. are there any things that we are born with, any forms of intellectual ability? Do we have a priori knowledge? Or are we born tabula rasa and we need to learn every bit of information? You know, it's kind of weird. Cognitive psychologists, or excuse me, language psychologists, linguistic psychologists will tell you that human beings may have language ability already programmed into their brain. Research is beginning to suggest that human beings maybe are even born with the roots of mathematical or physics knowledge already in their brain. It's really quite interesting, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the webinar. And you can all trace this back maybe even to Immanuel Kant in his book, The Critique of Pure Reason. He was the modern psychologist who really sort of outlined what thinking and memory and all that stuff might be like. Now, please don't read his book. It's crazy dense and hard to read. I tried to read it a couple times. It's impossible. But you will see his thinking represented in section 7.1, page 216 of your text, where they talk about two ways of thinking about objects. There are objects that we know because we can sense them: snow, rain, ice cream. You can taste these things and we know about them because we sense them with our senses. And he called that natural concepts. And you can contrast that with things like the concept of a triangle or a square. Those are concepts that you really you can't sense that. Instead, you have to kind of reason that knowledge out. I can't taste a triangle or a circle. Instead, they represent relationships between different objects. Your book's going to call those artificial concepts. But in a sense, there's always been an interest in how human beings process information and whether or not that information is innate or whether or not it's learned. Hi, Logan Phillips. Folks, Logan is a student of mine from a former semester, just dropping by to stop in and say hello. Hi, Logan. We're talking about the cognitive perspective in human beings as calculators. Now, one of the things I will tell you is one of the earliest approaches to cognitive psychology actually came in the 19th century. Wasn't very good science, and it involved introspection. Click on this link and read about introspection, and I want you to know for your homework this week who the most famous introspectionist lab, who had the most famous introspectionist lab in the United States. Well, thank you for stopping by. It's always great to see you, Logan, and everybody's welcome to stop by. So what I want you to be thinking about is how can we design or understand the design of the human mind as an object that can take input in, just like a computer, store that information just like a computer, and process that information just like a computer. And so that's what we're going to do. If you look at this picture of this young lady, she's taking information and sensation. She's storing it, processing it with her other memories and her information, and creating thoughts. Now, if you look over here to my side here, sort of the birth of the computer, of the cognitive perspective, was the invention of the computer. And people begin to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we can think about the human being as a systematic information processor. Now, if you'll remember several weeks ago in the birth of psychology, I introduced you to this idea of the difference threshold, the first, quote, measurement of the mind in 1851 by Gustav Fechner. It's the amount that something has to change before a human being can sense the change. And that was sort of the first scientific measure of the mind. And so, but after that, really, there was a lot of, if you will, resistance to the idea that you could think of people as having a generic set of instructions, a program that was similar for all of us. the belief still sort of held that each and every one of us had unique ways of thinking about the world and processing information. It really wasn't until this information processing machine of the computer that the idea that should try to understand the programming or the heart, the program inside the mind really caught fire. Now, this guy named George Miller published a cool book we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, The Magic Number 7, plus or minus T. 2. And as I suggested to you earlier, this guy, Noam Chomsky, demonstrated that not only is the computer analogy right, but you can think of human beings as having sort of this module, this ability to accept language that was innate, already inborn in their mind. So this sort of blew up this idea of the cognitive perspective. Now, here's the thing. I want you all to appreciate this. You may think I'm spending a lot of time talking about this. The cognitive perspective dominates psychology right now. Everything, every branch of psychology, every research study in psychology is going to incorporate cognitive neuroscience, cognitive behavioral, cognitive developmental, everything. There are cognitive explanations for psychological disorders. The cognitive perspective is huge. And so we're going to spend the rest of the semester sort of talking about this information processing machine. And I will tell you that since computers were invented, all right, in 1945, as soon as computers were invented, like I said, we tried to start figuring out how brains were like computers. There was a second group of people who became known as the artificial intelligence people, who wanted to build a brain, a computer that could mimic human beings. That is to say, as soon as computers were invented, somebody wanted to build one that was as smart as a human. And this field grew to be known as artificial intelligence. Now, you may or may not know that because you've just heard of artificial intelligence recently, but artificial intelligence has been around for about 70 years, and it's gone through periods of interest and then what they call artificial intelligence winters, when people sour on it. So as soon as computers were invented, the government, the military, threw millions and billions of dollars at computer scientists to try to figure out how to program a computer to think like a human being. It didn't work, and so the money dried up. And then the money came back, and the money went away again. And we are now in what you might call a period of heightened interest in artificial intelligence. Are we any closer to solving the problem? I don't think we're as close as people would have you think in fear, okay, to be quite honest. But what you need to know right now is we are in a period of artificial intelligence mania, where that's all everybody talks about. If you're interested in this idea of artificial intelligence and the history and as it relates to cognitive psychology, I have a link down here, artificial intelligence. Click on that link and it'll give you a great history of artificial intelligence in the last 70 years. It's a Wikipedia article. You really like it. All right, now, what humans do. Humans do the same thing that computers do. If you think about it, we encode information. Stuff comes into your eyes, you see a color, you see a person, you see a sentence, you hear something, you read something, you encode information into your brain. We do the same thing when we type some letters and numbers into a computer, or you send a picture to a computer. You are encoding information into that computer. And just like a computer does, we know that human beings must store that information. For example, can anybody tell me who the first president of the United States was? I'll go ahead and count to 3. 1, 2, 3. And I know it won't take any longer than that. And somebody can't tell me who it was. It was, you better type George Washington. There you go. Laura Mahaffey, Logan Phillips, you stored that information in your hard drive just like a computer does. and you managed to retrieve it back when I asked you. Human beings engage in encoding, storage, and retrieval processes just like computers do. So when cognitive psychology were born, this is where psychologists start. They wanted to know, how do human beings encode information, similar to or different than computers? How do human beings store information, similar to or different from computers? And are there any limitations in how human beings can retrieve information? Because with a computer, if you've got it there, you can get it back out, right? So we're going to ask these general theoretical questions, and we're going to know about the system. Now, why do you care about these general theoretical questions? Because it's going to help you understand the limitations of your memory. And if you appreciate how the system works, and you know what we call, you have meta memory, understanding of how memory works, you can actually improve your memory a great deal. You can really become a memory genius. Now, some of you are saying, there's no way I could ever go to medical school or law school because I'd have to memorize and learn too much. I would argue to you that most of you do not know how to use your memory properly. We'll talk about that in a webinar this week, and hopefully I can give you some help to improve your memory abilities so that you can achieve better in the field of education, right? Maybe you can go to law school or med school or be a scientist, right? Right. All right. So what we're going to be talking about, this research of these three processes has kind of led us to understand that the human mind works in sort of three broad processes. Now, I'm going to draw a picture over here. You'll see underneath here where it says sensory input and the pictures of the head. Aha. There you go. You need a lot of memory for very good, Sandeep. Well, I tell you what, maybe you and I can schedule an appointment. I can give you some memory tips and some videos where you can actually train your memory to work more quickly. It is easier than you know. All you have to do, it's just like any other ability, Sandeep. You actually have to learn it and practice it. And I can definitely help you if you're interested. So that's a great idea. Okay, so in this research, we've realized that human minds sort of have three broad processes. And I'm going to go over that and explain this in the next few minutes. You see, we have a sensory memory, a short-term memory, and a long-term memory. Don't think of these as places in the brain as much as think of them as three general activities by which sensory input is manipulated as it comes into the human mind. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, I'm going to show you a little demonstration. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I want you to read, do a little reading task. I want you to read left to right, top to bottom, just like you normally would if you were reading the English language. Here's the change. Here's the change. Here's the change. Instead of reading the word information, read the color of the ink that the word is printed in. So don't read the semantic information, ignore that, and instead read the color of the ink. So I have 15 words. You're going to read the color of the ink, left to right, top to bottom. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen with you right now. Go. Okay. What are you noticing as you are trying to read the color of the ink? Now, the correct answer is red, blue, green, yellow, green, black, blue, red, yellow, black, yellow, blue, green, red, black. Okay. What exactly did you notice about that? What was difficult about that task? Can somebody type in the chat bar? What was difficult about that? Okay. Now, what you should have experienced was it was probably, the color was different than the word. Yes. Did the word get in the way of your ability to read the color of the ink, Nelisa? Was it more difficult than you thought? Now, for most of you, this should probably have been a little bit more difficult. It was more difficult than I thought, yes. Now, and the deal is, it's because your brain wanted to read purple, yellow, red, black, green, red, black, green, excuse me. Whew. You were focused on the words and not the colors. Exactly, Sandy. Here's the thing. You should think of your mind as having this filter. Remember, I told you last week, we don't have a lot of ability to pay attention. We have to decide what it is we're going to pay attention. So the first part of our mind is actually a preconscious sensory filter. This is called the sensory memory. And what happens is the sensory memory filters out things it doesn't think you want to pay attention to. Do you remember last week when we did the dancing bear experiment and you noticed that that bear walked right across your eyes and yet you didn't notice it? It's because it was filtered out by your sensory memory. Your sensory memory was focused on the people in the white, and so your sensory memory saw the bear but decided not to pay attention to it. Okay, it filtered that information out. Now, when you were reading this words, here's the thing. Stimuli that you'll read in your world have many different properties about them. If you think about it, these words have both color information, they're written in a color ink, and they also have semantic information. They spell out a word you know. And what happened in this experiment is your brain is used to ignoring the color and focusing on the semantic information. And so what happens in the Stroop effect is you are trying to fight against that filter that your brain has for what it wants to call up into consciousness. Does this make sense? We actually have a filter in our brain. Now, one of the earliest demonstrations of this filter was, and this is in your textbook, it was called the dichotic listening task. It's called the cocktail party effect, and they used a dichotic listening task. What they do is they put headphones on a person and they play two sets of words, one set in the left ear and one set in the right ear. And they tell the person not to pay attention to one ear. And they give them a test later, and sure enough, when people try not to pay attention to an ear, they actually don't hear anything that comes in that attending ear, with one exception. If you play their name in that ear they're not listening to, they always hear that. It gets through that filter. Okay? So, what I want you to know, human beings, is that you have a preconscious filter. Now, what this does, if you remember, we talked about the Stroop effect with these colors. If you remember the dancing bear inattentional blindness, and for those of you who came to the webinar last week, we did the change blindness study with the whodunit, and we changed the crime scene around and you couldn't notice it. It's all because at this very beginning part of your mind called the sensory memory, you have a part of your mind that looks at things and says, yep, I'm going to pay attention to that. Nope, I'm not going to pay attention to that. Yep, I'm going to pay attention to that. Okay. Now, if you'll notice that this model, it comes to the sensory memory. And if you're not going to encode it into your short-term memory, it's transferred. It's lost. It goes away. I ask you, did you see the dancing bear? And you say, no, I didn't see the dancing bear. If you do pay attention to that object, like the text of the words in the Stroop, it then comes into the second part of your memory we'll call the short-term memory. Now, short-term memory in psychology is different than short-term memory in the EMT world. When you get in an accident, if you lost any memory for what happened over the last day, somebody will say, I'm experiencing short-term memory loss. I'm not talking about short-term memory that way. in cognitive psychology, when we talk about short-term memory, we talk about what you are able to think about right now, what is on your mind this second. All right. Now, if you think about it, I just mentioned George Washington 5 minutes ago. He's not in our short-term memory. He left our short-term memory. Okay. Remember, I mentioned him. We were thinking about him. And then we quit thinking about George Washington and we went on to some other stuff. He left our short-term memory. What we're talking about right now is in our short-term memory. Okay? You quit thinking about the Stroop effect. So the Stroop effect is no longer in your short-term memory. The short-term memory is just what you are actively thinking about right now. So human beings have, right now, at this point, we're talking about two parts of the mind. The first part filters information out so you only focus on what's important for you, the organism. And the second part is what you're actively thinking about, your short-term memory. Now, this guy named George Miller did this really cool set of studies in the 1950s, and he demonstrated that human beings are really good at keeping somewhere between 5 and 9 things in their mind at any one given time. There, I've just forgot all the words. There you go. Sandeep, it's already disappeared from Sandeep's short-term memory. Fantastic. We'll talk about how to keep them in your long-term memory. The key, Sandeep, to keeping things in your long-term memory is how you think about them or rehearse them while they're in your short-term memory. If you go back 2 pages, you'll notice we have this little circle rehearsal here. That rehearsal is important. How you choose to engage with the material while it's in your mind determines how well you remember it later. We're going to talk about that, Sandeep, okay? Now, what this guy found is that human beings are pretty good at juggling about 7 things in their mind at one time. For example, Sandeep and Elisa, if I called you on the phone, let's say we were roommates and you were on the way home, and I called you and I said, hey, I need you to stop by the grocery store, pick up these items: bananas, trash bags, milk, eggs, flour, salt, pepper, we need some avocados, steak. At some point, I would say so many things that you would go, oh my God, I can't remember that many things. What Miller found is that human beings in general can manage about 7 categories or chunks in their conscious awareness at any one time. Okay, so most of you, if I ask you to engage in a memory task, and you know what, we may even do one in webinar if you want to. I can give you a memory task, and what I find is that generally, if I read a list of 20 words, most people will remember somewhere between 5 and 9 words in that list. So one of the things we know is that short-term memory, your ability to keep things in your conscious awareness, is very limited. Remember, I told you, cognitive misers. We can't focus a lot. All right? Now, as long as you're rehearsing the information, it stays in your long-term memory. But to get it to the short-term memory, but to get it to the long-term memory, you need to change the way you rehearse it. Now, if you look at this graph right over here, you see this graph over here, there's one more interesting phenomenon about this short-term memory. All right? And this is called the serial position effect. What you're going to notice is that if I read out a bunch of things for you to remember, you're going to remember certain items on the list better than other items on the list. So Sandeep, when your mom calls you on the phone, or dad calls you on the phone, and your mom calls you on the phone and tells you to pick up a list of things, and gives you, let's say, 15 grocery items to remember, you're going to forget some of them. You're going to remember the first 3 or 4 things your mother told you, and you're going to remember the last 3 or 4 things that your mother told you, and you're not going to remember the things in the middle much at all. Okay, does that make sense? This is known as the serial position effect, and you'll notice that we have both a primacy effect and what we have a recency effect. And these just describe which ends of the distribution are experienced, which ends of the list are experiencing the best amount of recall. Now, Sandy, here's the key. Here's the key. Here's the key, Sandy, to having better memory. What you need to do is to realize that you can create chunks. And while your brain is limited to only 7 things, 7 chunks, those chunks can be as big as you want. Okay? So if I was to read you a list of 21 words, and the first 3 words were tomato, bread, and eggs, instead of thinking about 3 things, tomato, bread, and eggs, that's 3 chunks, you would put them all together and you would think of an egg and tomato sandwich. Do you see what I'm saying, Nelisa and Sandy? So what you're doing is you put those 3 things together, and when you put them together in your mind, they become one concept, one chunk, and you can later break that chunk away. So my mom didn't want me to get bread, tomato, and eggs, right? Instead, my mom wanted me to get an egg tomato sandwich. Boom, that's a concept. And so people who have great memory know how to chunk things that come to them really quickly. That's one of the memory techniques. You folks may or may not know this, but there is actually an International Memory Olympics. And there are international memory competitors. They would call themselves memory athletes. And these people practice their amazing memory. And one of the things that they practice doing is chunking on demand. So they might have somebody read lists to them, and they practice chunking every 3 things into a, yes, you can use initials. That's the great point, Sandeep. You actually can use, you should use whatever is important to you. So if you think of sandwich, bread, if you think of bread, tomato, and eggs different than me, then you wouldn't use sandwich. Let's say your mom made some recipe that used those 3 things, you would think of that object. But yes, what these people do is they use chunking and they use imagery. They use imagery because human brains evolved over millions of years to remember images. Language is a very late invention, and the human being is not as good at remembering words as it is as memorizing pictures. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay? Yeah, Google Memory. And actually, you know, a neat thing that you could Google, I like this guy. His name is Luis Angel A. E. Mind. And he I love his story. He tells a story where he was a community college dropout making all D's and F's, and he thought that he was just dumb. And somebody turned him on to these memory tricks, and he realized after a little bit of practice that not only was he not dumb, but he had a pretty sharp memory ability. This guy went back, graduated to college. He became a memory athlete. He's competed in national and international events. I don't think he's an international winner. Those dudes are bad. Those people are bad. But he's a competitor, and now he has a consulting business, and he has a ton of online videos that can help you learn tips and tricks for math, for learning medical terminology, for general memory, and he's got a lot of tips to help you with these kinds of tricks, okay? I think you'll find them very interesting. Now, as I suggested to you, in this model over here, does that mean that anyone can improve their memory? Yes. Yes. Absolutely. In fact, what I'm going to say, Nelisa, is that if you learn these tips and tricks, you're going to be shocked at how easy it is to remember things. This is the biggest crime in the educational system. What they should do in kindergarten is teach you how your mind works. They should teach kindergartens because these tricks are that easy. They should teach kindergartners these memory tricks so that everything else can be learned super easy. In fact, I saw a video where a guy he showed how in half an hour you can learn every important date that you will need for the first 12 years of your education. In order to have a high school diploma, you can learn every date, important date in history, in American history, you need to know in about a half an hour. The key is that nobody has told us how to use our memory. They lied to us. They told us that some people have good memories and some people do not have good memories. That is the biggest lie in the universe. Most people have untrained memories. Some people stumble onto some memory tricks, but if you systematically learn how to use your mind, I swear to goodness, you will have a great memory. Okay? Now, here's the deal. No, there are these people called savants. Now, those human calculators, there's a guy named Kim Peek that I've got a video for you to look at. Those people, there are some people, savants, and a lot of times these savants also have disruptions in their other normal abilities. Sometimes they use the word idiot, savant. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. But no, I'm not talking about those savant people. Now, those people are off the rails, okay? But I'm just talking about the kind of person that could easily learn all the bones and muscles and stuff, getting through med school. I guarantee you that of all the people in the class, probably 2/3 of you have what it takes to get through med school if somebody taught you how to use your brain. That is the God's honest truth. Now, here's the deal. It's all in how you rehearse the information when it's in your short-term memory. First, let's stop and talk a little bit abstractly about what the human mind looks like. If you would, please, I'm going to say the word circus, and I want you to start telling me what is in your mind when you hear the word circus. Go. What pops into your head? Circus. What pops into your head? I have a couple of people still on the broadcast. What words pop into your head when you hear the word circus? Let's play a little association game. And you know what? Let me go to this right here. Okay, I hear elephants, clowns. Nice. What else do we have? Tigers. Nice. You notice a couple of people said clowns. Imagine that, right? Anything else? Anything else? I would say maybe peanuts, right? Okay. Ooh, tightrope. Love that. Okay. Now, ooh, tense. There you go. Tense. Fantastic. Okay, folks. Would we all agree that all of these words belong here? What if I wrote this word right here? What if I wrote the word, let's see, hard drive? Could we all agree that this one doesn't really belong, right? This is what's known as a schema, all right? And we know, although we don't know how it's done in the brain, I promise you we don't know how it's done in the brain. This thing right here exists in everybody's mind. In every concept I could ever say, you would be able to give me half a dozen words off the top of your head that would flesh out that concept before me. These things are known as schemas. And we know that they exist in our mind. You know what? I could even throw out the word Africa to you. You could give me a schema for Africa, couldn't you, folks, right? Okay, what are some words that belong, that are associated with the word Africa? Can anybody really quickly give me some words that would go with Africa? Quick, quick, quick. I'm going to write down there. Holy cow. Would anybody say elephants? Right? And what about tigers and desert? Right. All right. Ooh, safari. Nice. Okay. Now, do you notice how we've got this, this, and zebras, right? And you know what? You may see the zebras at the circus too. This is a schema. This is a schema. These two things together are what we call a semantic network. All right. Now, why did I tell you all that stuff? What I want you to know is that some way or another, human beings begin building a network through experience early in their life. What your mom tells you, what your dad tells you, what you see, what you feel, what you think. You begin building this network of memories in your brain. We'll call it a semantic network. And this semantic network has these individual nodes we'll call schemas. And you can even switch from schema to schema. So I can say zoo. I could say circus. You could then say the word elephant. And then the next person could then say Africa. Another person could then say diamonds, which could then cause another person to say wedding. And we could bounce from schema to schema to schema based on this fact that schemas are related to one another in these networks. Now, why are you boring me with all of this, Chris? Why are you boring with me? Because this is the key to understanding your memory. This slide right here is the key to understanding your memory. If you want to get something in your memory, you need to relate it to things that are already in your memory. We're going to call that elaborative rehearsal. Now, if you want to remember biology words, you need to find a pattern or a way of relating them to other things that are in your mind. Things you can group together. Yes, a schema is another word. It's a psychological word for a concept. You know, if I say a concept, baseball, that's a concept, and you can draw a bunch of associations to that concept. And that node is called a schema. All right? And it turns out that when you give people a list of words to remember, if you give them a schema to think about, they will have better memory for the words that are associated with the schema than the words that are not associated with the schema. But knowing that your mind works this way, what you need to do is relate the information you want to remember to the schema that's already in your mind. This is what's known as elaborative rehearsal. Rehearsal that involves relating the memory trace to other memory traces in your long-term memory. By connecting with story, I can create. Yes, yes, yes. Here's the deal. I'm really good with phone numbers, and phone numbers fall into patterns for me, and I don't know why. I'm a sort of a history buff. I have a friend, and his phone number is almost, I changed it one digit so that you won't call him. His phone number is 776-1066. Now, instead of trying to remember those 7 numbers, Sandeep, I chunked him into 2 historical events that are important. 776 reminds me of 1776, the Declaration of Independence. And then 1066, since I'm a history nerd and I paid attention in 11th grade, I know that William the Conqueror in the Battle of Normandy, the Norman invasion, occurred in 1066. So as soon as the first time my friend Linwood told me his phone number, hey, my phone number is 776-1066. Do you need to write that down? I was like, no, Linwood, I got you. You are the Declaration of Independence and the Norman invasion. Boom. And suddenly it popped into my head. He gave me his phone number. Actually, I haven't called the guy in 20 years. We did work together, and then we don't work together anymore, so I haven't called him. I still remember his number because I related it to something that's already in my mind. Does that make sense, Nalisa? Does that make sense, Sandy? If you really, really, really want to remember something, you need to relate it to things that are already in your mind. Chunk them together, relate them to things that are in your mind, and use humor, because it turns out your amygdala is very important. It's attached to your memory center, your hippocampus, and it activates memories and makes you remember things. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit. All right. Briefly, when we think about memory, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier or later, you can think about memories that you have. What I've been talking about today are what we call explicit memories. Explicit memories are things you learn in school. Anything you have to say out loud is what we would call an explicit memory. But if you think about it, folks, did you realize that you have memories that you don't really think of as memories? You remember how to walk. You remember how to ride a bike. You can remember how to dial a phone. Those are memories too. So let's think of those as what we call non-declarative memories. Actually, sometimes if you've ever been afraid of somebody and when that person walks back in the room, you suddenly feel afraid, that fear is a memory as well. So let's differentiate. What we've been talking about is explicit memories, and the other are what we call implicit memories. Now, explicit memories, we have two different memories. We have memories for facts, who George Washington was, all right? And then we have memories for things that happened to us. I remember this happened on my 4th birthday party, right? Now, the crazy thing is, we're going to find that episodic memories, our memories for things that happened to us, are some of the least accurate memories you'll have. So the next time you're arguing with a friend about what happened at a party 5 years ago, chances are both of you are wrong. Subconscious, yes, they are subconscious. In fact, here's the crazy thing. This is why we know they exist, Sandeep, is because there are people who have severe memory damage. In fact, I got a video of a guy called the man with the 7-second memory. His memory areas for explicit memory were completely wiped out. This guy cannot remember who his wife is. He can't remember who his kids are. He can't remember what town he lives in. He can't remember meeting a person 5 seconds after he's met the person. But he can play elaborate classical piano concertos because he doesn't have to think about it. So it's non-conscious, right? And then when we talk about these, that's what we would call a procedural skill. And then, like I said, sometimes we remember that things make us afraid. We'll call that emotional memory, if you will. By the way, Henry Meliason is on this week's homework, so go ahead and click on that link and find out which part of Henry Meliason's brain was damaged. Now, if you look at the brain right here, let's talk about types of memories. Now, I told you that because I wanted to talk about all the different kinds of memory, explicit and implicit memories. Now, here's the deal. If you're going to, when we're talking about brain damage and its effect on our memories, brain damage that affects our prefrontal and temporal cortex, this front part of our brain, or our hippocampus, okay, which is right underneath our brain and connected to our temporal lobe. If we lose those part of our brains, we're going to tend to lose explicit memory, our memory for things that happen. But damage to this part of the brain is still going to leave you able to ride a bike. It's going to leave you able to walk. You may be able to play the piano. You will still remember that you are afraid of some things, okay? So the prefrontal and temporal cortex. On the other hand, damage to the amygdala and the cerebellum is going to be more likely to affect your emotional fear memories, or if it's your cerebellum, it's going to mess up your ability to perform certain behaviors. So if you've ever watched people walking around and somebody's walking with one of those really weird limp and they're kind of jerking their side and you wonder what's wrong with that person, chances are they have cerebellum damage or atrophy there, or some sort of problem with their cerebellum. And so they're not able to remember how to move their body smoothly. Your cerebellum may be the most complex part of your brain with all of these amazing woven connections between neurons, and it allows you to engage in really smooth behaviors. So if you see people who have these abnormal gaits or stuff like that, this may be due to cerebellum damage. Different from Parkinson's. If somebody starts having Parkinson's, that's a different part of the brain. It gets super duper complicated. If you look on the prior page, there's Cuvier-Blucy syndrome. It's only done experimentally in animals, but turns out that if you destroy the amygdala in some animals, they lose their ability to appreciate the fear that they should have of dangerous objects, predators, so to speak. So you'll want to look into that. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the temporal cortex and the hippocampus. Now, here's the crazy thing. The hippocampus is the most underrated of all of your memory of your brain structures. It's important for memory and location. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. Because what do you need to remember? You need to remember where the food is, and where the water is, and where the predators are. So your hippocampus is awesome at your memory for location, and it's also an important part in where memory is learned. So location, and it's close to your amygdala. So the things that you find that make you scared or make you really happy, the location of where those objects are is easily remembered by the human being. That's how the human being is built. That's what memory is for. It's to help you survive, to know where all the good stuff is. So your hippocampus, it helps you process new information. Now, the information is not stored in the hippocampus. It's actually stored in your temporal lobes. I'm going to have you look at Henry Molaison. Henry Molaison's hippocampus was destroyed. Actually, they took it out because he was having really bad seizures. They took this out. The crazy thing was Henry Molaison could remember everything that happened before the surgery. His memory for knowledge and facts that happened before the surgery was completely intact. But he was unable to learn anything new. And so that's when scientists and psychologists discovered that the hippocampus is responsible for processing memories. They're not stored there, but they're processed there. If you have damage to your frontal lobes or your temporal lobes, you may lose memory for things that happened before the accident, but you'll be able to learn new stuff. If you have damage to the hippocampus, you can remember the stuff that happened before the accident, but you can't remember anything new. Now, one final note, I'm running out of time, so we're not going to get to it. We'll talk about this. Oh, God, I wish I had more time. Here's the deal. If you want to improve your memory, Sandy, what they're going to do is talk about making things visual, using location and chunking things, using humor, visual information, funny images, and put them in places. Google method of location. That is a very, very famous tool that is taught by all memory trainers. If you Google it on YouTube, you will get no less than 100 videos showing you how to do the method of location. And what the method of location does is it activates the hippocampus, because when your hippocampus is activated, you get your memory, saved. Yes, Sandeep, I love your analogy. Turns out the analogy is not perfect, but it's close enough for for folks like you and I. So I like the way you're thinking. I've run out of time. I want you on your own to read about memory. It turns out that memory is not perfect, especially for events that happen to us. And people have a tendency to change accurate memories in very predictable ways. Now, for the writing assignment, you're going to have to know and be able to apply these writing assignments, these concepts that I have here, to the writing assignment. So I'm going to have you read about a case, and then you're going to evaluate the case and tell me what's going on. And I want you to use the terms on this page right here to evaluate the case. That'll help you get this writing assignment correct. All right. I have run out of time. I hope, did you learn anything today? Do you feel like you picked up any new insights about how the mind works? And I do love your computer analogy. I hope you enjoyed the class. I will be back on Thursday at 1 o'clock, and we'll talk about the ways in which humans are different than computers, namely motivation and emotion. And yeah, I'll answer any questions you have. Well, thank you very much. I'll have your homework, your first written assignments graded by Thursday at midnight at the latest, but I hope to have it done before. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to log off. Take care, and I will see you. Oh, thank you very much. I will see you next lecture. Take care. Bye.